also the invitation to give a talk. So I know by experience, because I'm also attending the talks when other people are giving them, that are in principle a lot of students. So I decided to have, I mean, kind of introductory beginning of my talk to the topic of transport, I would say. Okay, so let me start without any further ado. Okay, and I'd like to, and now I don't know, yes, okay. So, okay, I just put my name here as the author of the talk, but of course, I mean, all the body of work that I'm going to present to you has been done with many collaborators, and here I'm just sketching the essential ones for the topic CFS. So Sanjeev Ghosh, okay, who did his PhD work on that topic, by the way, so all the nice numerics, everything is doing, okay, so, and now he's a postdoc at NTU with Tim Liu, so I believe some of you know him or have met him in the corridors, okay. This work was done in supervision with two of my friends at LKB in Paris, okay, Nicolas Chororé and Dominique Delalande. Okay. So the overview of my talk will be as a crash course on motion in disordered media. I will browse a certain number of topics and concepts, and then I will describe the scenario of localization, signatures in momentum space, and hopefully touch on these critical properties of the 3D Anderson transition using this new interference effect. I mean, an old one, the CBS, coherent backscattering effect, and the new one that we discovered back in 2012, the coherent forward scattering peak, okay? And if time permits, then I will also mention about the link with multifractality when you're exactly at the transition point, okay? And close the seminar with some summary and perspective. So a crash course, motion in disordered media, okay? So there are kind of three kind of subtopics, I would say. First, diffusion, then going to weak localization, and you will see that loops play a very important role. And then going to the strong, also known as Anderson localization. I mean, the great physicist Anderson who passed away, I mean, recently, okay? And this famous paper of 58, absence of diffusion in certain random lattices. And the idea of this discussion is to say that at a very basic level, when we consider particles, I mean, propagating in a scattering environment, we expect very naturally diffusion to happen. But because of interference effect and because of these loops, there are interference effects are hampering, I mean, the diffusion motion. And the interference effect can be so strong, and we will see that in fact it is a rule, essentially, that you are led to strong localization. That is to say, the particle does not move anymore, okay? So let's start with the particles picture, and you just have to consider conduction as a pinball game, in fact. I mean, so when you have a disordered landscape, the particles, and you can imagine a stream of little balls, if you wish, okay, moving and counting bumpers. So here I put this, I don't know if you know the movie Pinball, Tommy the Who, I mean the movie, and when he plays the Pinball Wizard against, I mean, I don't remember the name now of the guy singing. Anyway, whatever. So it's exactly that. You have a stream of particles bumping around and being scattered. Okay, so and typically what we introduce is a notion of the scattering mean-free path, and the scattering mean-free path is a typical distance you propagate between two scattering events. Okay, so this is an important time scale, so microscopic time scale. Okay, so you see that the particle will never go in a straight line in a way. And so very naturally, you expect that the motion is diffusive, will be diffusive. I don't have time to elaborate on that. There are very simple arguments. Okay, particle conservation plus the Fick's law, okay, and you can derive a diffusion equation. So essentially what we say that if we look at what is happening at scales which are larger than the scattering mean-free path, the motion is diffusive. We have a random walk. And this is, as I said, very intuitive behavior, and this is because of that you get, I mean, the Ohm's law, for example. And this goes back to Drude models for a metal. It goes back to Boltzmann, to Langevin, to Einstein, to Smoluchowski, a lot of, I mean, big names in physics, okay? So this is well understood, okay? So here I give, I mean, typical trajectories, okay? These have been, I mean, obtained by Sanjeev, okay? So you start, for example, here, and you launch, I mean, a random walk, okay? And here in 2D, and you see that the particle undergoes a very, I mean, complicated motion, and here this is where it ends. Okay. Now you start. I didn't put on top of each other, but in fact the start point here are the same. And you see that if you start another simulation, you get something different. The trajectory looks the same, okay, but it's different. Okay, at least spatially different. Okay. So if you look now at the distance between the start and the endpoint after time t is here the number of steps that you take. This is what you get. So this is an average, okay? So this is, for example, typically, I believe the color corresponds, the red one corresponds to this one. So you start here, the next one is here, the next one is here, and you look at the distance, okay, and how it evolves. But now, if you do a disorder average, so you compile all this data, what you get is that the distance traveled, so the square root of the R squared average, grows like the square root of time. Okay, so this is a diffusion motion, which is encapsulated in this formula, S squared plus Y squared plus Z squared. If you are in 3 dimensions, if you are in 2 dimensions, it's S squared plus Y squared, etc., is equal to 6. The factor 6 is related to dimension of space, and featuring the diffusion constant times time. Okay. This also translates into the conductivity of the medium, because the current density, if you have charged particle, is given by the conductivity times the electrical field. And the conductivity is in fact related to the diffusion constant. I will come back to that in the next slide. This is the Einstein-Kubo formula, which is, I mean, a manifestation of the fluctuation dissipation theorem. Okay, so very naturally we get the diffusion, the classical diffusion. There is here you can consider balls. Okay, so it's not wave. So now let me say something very general. Okay. So you see this formula that you obtain, this Kubo-Einstein fluctuation dissipation-like formula for the electronic conductivity, relates the conductivity to the diffusion constant. And of course, there are other factors. This rho is what we call the average density of states per unit volume. I will come back to that later, okay? And here there is a prefactor to give, I mean, the unit, okay? So this part here is dimensionless. Yeah. So what we call an insulator is a material where the conductivity here is 0. And you see when you look at this formula that you can have 2 ways of getting 0. Either the density of states is 0, that is to say you are looking at an energy where there are no states, there are no available states for conduction to happen. And this is what we call in a band insulator, and this is a typical case of insulator that we meet in solid states classes, okay? When you have lectures on solid state physics, okay? Essentially, you remember that you have a band structure, you have a valence band and conduction band. And so when you have, I mean, a completely filled band, valence band, and no electrons in the conduction band, then you have an insulator, and you know maybe that there is this semi-metal case of the graphene where you have these Dirac points, okay? Now, what I want to address is a much more subtle mechanism, okay? Is the fact that the diffusion constant itself could be 0, okay? And in view of what just I said, it has to be subtle because from a classical point of view, I don't get 0 as soon as I have many scatterers. I mean, this is natural to go into the diffusion. And this is Anderson localization, the fact that you can suppress diffusion by interference. And this is what is the point of my talk, okay? You can have other non-trivial mechanisms, for example, interactions. Here I'm speaking of non-interacting particle. You can have interaction, you can have frustration, etc. So the topic of metal insulator transition is very rich. Okay, so as I say, interaction, disorder, frustration, etc. I will only concentrate into this Anderson localization, so the particles are not interacting. Okay, so yes, so we saw classical diffusion. Now we deal with quantum mechanics, or we deal with optics with a wave. Say, okay, so yes, okay. So what is new? Of course, I mean, when you deal with a wave, immediately you should ring a bell, interference. Okay, so how do we have interference into the game? Well, it's kind of also, I mean, simple to say, okay? So if I want to propagate a particle from A to B, you know from this Feynman picture that the particle can follow many paths between the two. And essentially what you have to do is to sum the probabilities over all possible paths connecting the 2 points, because they are in the undistinguishable alternatives. Of course, I perfectly understand that you could maybe distinguish depending if the particle has a spin, blah, blah, blah. Let's go simple, okay? So you have many paths, the particle can take many paths, and all these paths are indistinguishable. So in principle, yes, you add the amplitude, and once you add the amplitude, then you take the modulus square. So this is what I wrote here. So you have the amplitude to go from A to B is the sum of all the paths, and the amplitude of the path, just write it as the square root of this probability of following this path and the phase. So if I consider now the intensity and the average, you have the sum of the paths P and P prime, and you have A star P, A P prime. And you see that this sum I can break in 2 terms. I consider the terms P equal P prime and the other term. So the first term is what, in fact, when you look at the theory, is what brings you back to the classical diffusion, in fact, because it's a sum of squares, and there are no interference terms in this term here. And what you say that if you do the average, the phases are so different between P and P prime, and there are conditions for that, okay, that I'm not writing, okay, then you just can discard. You say that the average of a disorder configuration randomizes the phases and washes out in this term. So despite the fact that you have a wave, it seems that this argument is telling you that nothing is happening. Okay, the disorder washes out the phase, you are back to the classical diffusion. So when you do that, for the technical expert, you are dealing with what we call ladder diagrams. That is to say, when you look at amplitudes, the amplitude AP and the amplitude conjugate are following the same scattering path in the same direction. So no interference, really, but no, not really, in fact, because I'm just making, a small detour by optics, okay? Suppose I have, scatterers here, and I shine light onto these scatterers, and I look at the scattered light. If I do so, and I suppose the scatterers are not moving, fixed, okay? What we call, quenched disorder, okay? And you look at the angular distribution of the scattered field, what you see is a speckle pattern that I show here. You have spikes, okay, bright fringe, black fringes, very complicated pattern. Suppose now that I do an average. How would I do an average? Suppose, I have, for example, balls, okay, whatever. So I shake the balls, okay, they have now different positions, and I redo the interference pattern. I get another speckle pattern. And I do that many, 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 many times. And now what I do when I compute the average is just that I sum up all these patterns, and I divide by the number of patterns that I had, and I get the average scattered intensity. So according to my argument, previous argument, I should recover, in fact, if you follow the laws of diffusion, you would get a smooth background. And this is not what you observe. You observe a smooth background that you see, but you see a peak emerging, and this peak is emerging exactly at backscattering. What does it mean, backscattering here? Is that you send light in a certain direction, and you look at the light going out in the opposite direction. And this peak cannot be explained by classical diffusion. And in fact, when you look at the physical situation, it's exactly the same as a Young slit experiment, where one slit is the entry point of the light, and the other slit is the exit point of the other light. And when you look at the phase difference between these two paths, you find that it is a sum of the k's, initial and final, times the vector joining the endpoints of the scattering sequence. And you immediately that this phase is always zero if ki plus kf is zero, that is to say backscattering direction. So this interference effect cannot be washed out by the disorder average. Okay, so we have a bright fringe irrespective of the scattering path. And when you look at the configuration here, you see that, that it is in fact a loop-like effect. Okay, here it's in momentum space, but it's a loop-like effect. Okay. So yes, loops. So now let me come back to the more usual, picture that I had, the diffusion. And this is a typical, diffusion path, scattering, classical scattering diffusion path. Okay, and you see that you have a lot of loops here, 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 or quasi-loops. That is to say, you come back very near to the point where you started. Okay. So now you see that you have a choice. Okay, that is to say, and this is reflected here. I come here, I can follow this path, the loop clockwise and go and exit, but I can always as well follow the loop anti-clockwise. And this is undistinguishable. And of course, if I take the modulus square of that, I will have a perfect interference between the two terms. Why is that so? Because the phase associated to this path is exactly equal to the phase equal to this one. At least if time reversal symmetry holds. But I said we go simple for the time being. So we expect an enhancement, in fact. Okay, so it means that, so it means that having an enhancement, what does it mean? It means that the particle tends to prefer to stay at the same place than going away. But if the particle wants to stay at the same place, it means that the diffusion is slowed down. So the diffusion constant is reduced. And Anderson localization is in fact the fact that the disorder can be so strong in a way that you prevent the particle from moving. Of course, it's a little bit more complicated than what I said, but this is the idea. So how to formalize this idea? Because it looks that, the loops have a big effect in 2D, but maybe not in 1D. How do I get with, I deal with the dimension of the system? Okay. Then we have to jump until 79, this gang of 4 people, Abrams, Anderson, Licciardello, and Ramakrishnan, who asked the question, okay, how does the dimensionless conductance G, so what is the dimensionless conductance? Is the conductance divided by the unit of conductance, this E squared divided by H. How does this dimensional conductance change when the system size increases? So you see, I have a small cube of size L, and I increase. In 1D would be, I construct a bar, so to say here I'm in a surface or a volume. And what they came up with is to say that if we take the derivative, so the dimensionless conductance in principle depends on the energy, on the scattering mean free path, on the disorder strength, on many parameters. So it's a function of many variables. So they say that if I take the partial derivative of the log of the conductance with respect to the log of the size, this is a function that depends on many parameters, the size, as I said, the energy, the scattering, whatever you name the parameters. In fact, it's only a function of G itself, which means that in fact, this partial derivative is a straight derivative. So this is an hypothesis, huh? It's not, okay. But if you fulfill this hypothesis, then the rest follows. So what does this scaling hypothesis, one parameter scaling hypothesis, what are the consequences, okay? So essentially, it says also that this function G can be written as a function of the size of the system divided by a correlation length. And this correlation length subsumes all the other parameters or quantities. So it's a fraction of a ratio. So now, how would you get an idea of what the scaling function is. Well, you look at this cube of size L, you have a current, you have them in the voltage drop, okay, and you write, okay? So if I am in a metallic regime, Ohm's law, say, to say simple, don't go through the derivation. If you want the slides, I can leave the slides to David, okay? So you can show, because of the Ohm's law, that the dimensionless conductance goes like the size of the system divided by the mean free path to the power d minus 2. So if I take the log of G and I compute the derivative, I can see that the scaling function is just the dimension minus 2. Now, if I am in the localized regime, I expect the transmission to be, the conductance here to be exponentially small. And if I compute the beta function, I have the log of G. So if I am a localized log of G, if I am diffusive metallic d minus 2. So now what I have to do is to match the behaviors assuming the monotony. And this is what they did. And this is what you get as beta of G as a function of the log of G. So on the insulating side, as a function of log of G is just a straight line. And you must approach d minus 2 when you go to the metallic side. Okay? So in dimension 1, minus 1. In dimension 2, 0. And in dimension 3, 1. And now you match smoothly. So you see in dimension 1, what you do something like that. In dimension 2, you do something like that. And in dimension 3, you do something like that. So what is remarkable here is that, in fact, you see that for dimension 1 and 2, the scaling function is always negative. Beta of G is always negative. What does it mean? Beta of G is a derivative of the log of G over the log of L. So if L is increasing, since beta of G is negative, it means that the conductivity is decreasing. So in fact, the flow, when you increase L, is going to the metallic, to the insulating side, localization. So in 1D and 2D, the prediction is always localized. In 3D, it's different. In 3D, you see that there is a part which is negative, so the flow will bring you into the insulating side. But if you are above a critical point, then the flow is bringing you to the metallic side because the beta of G is now negative. So this is the Anderson transition point in 3D. And in fact, it's a real, a phase transition where you have, critical exponents, and I will come back to that later. Okay. Okay, how you can get the transition point? There is a hand-waving argument. This is called the Joffe-Regel criterion. In fact, you say that the wavelengths of the particle should be of the order of the mean free path itself. Okay. So finally, the picture that emerges for 3D systems here, okay, infinite size system, is that you have, a part where the eigenstates are localized, the system is an insulator, and a part where the system, the eigenstates are extended, and the system is a metal, and it is separated by a so-called mobility edge, where the transition happens. And near the mobility edge, on the insulating side, the localization length, the size, the typical size of the wave function goes to infinity, and with a behavior which is given by this algebraic increase with nu the critical exponent. And on the other side, on the metallic side, when you approach from above, you get that the diffusion constant goes to 0 with some power S. And in fact, it turns out that in 3D, S and nu are equal. And these are the critical exponents of the Anderson transition, and that we will be studying. Okay. So let me just briefly mention, I will not enter the details here, about a technique which is important. In fact, when you study phase transition, as I say, the system size is infinite. And in fact, it's never infinite when you do at least a numerical simulation and so on. So you need to have, a procedure to be able to extract what are the quantities in the hypothetical infinite size limit. Okay. So the people have developed techniques called finite size scaling that translate into infinite time scaling when you deal with transition happening at large times. Okay, so I will not enter these details right now. If you have questions, I can come back. Otherwise, I will not have time to enter my the core of my talk. So I have slides on that, and I can explain. Okay. So as in a nutshell, Classical level, pinball wizard, you discard interference, Drude-Boltzmann model, large-scale motion is diffusion, as I said, the ladder, okay? But there is a twist, okay, to rephrase the song by the Who, because of loops. Interference do play a role if you have quasi-loops or quasi-loops. Example, the Coherent backscattering effect, the weak localization corrections, okay? And it means that you have, kind of, you jump on the other side and you have a loop travel in the opposite direction. And finally, in fact, Schur plays mean p-ball because interference can completely break transport, and this is a strong localization regime. And we face in 3D a disorder-driven metal insulator transition. Okay, so let me go now to localization signature in momentum space, unless there are questions at this stage. Okay, if you want to have ask me question at this stage, I don't know. No? If not, I'm continuing, okay? So localization signature in momentum space. Okay, so of course, Anderson localization has been observed, and I'm coming from the field of cold atoms, so I'm just here, sketching what has been done with cold atoms, okay? But essentially, most of the experiments, they have seen Anderson localization in real space. What do I mean by that? Of course, localization is happening here in real space because the disorder is in real space. When I say real space, is R, okay, the R space, okay? So you have, a disordered landscape, and then you launch the particles, and they propagate, and then they are confined because of this Anderson mechanism, okay? But when I say that the evidence is in real space, it means that the people have measured the spatial distribution of atoms. And you see here, for example, you prepare atoms at some location, and now you see how it evolves, and you see that the wave packet is increasing, the size is increasing in time, and if you do a time analysis of this, you will see that it follows the diffusion. That is to say that the typical size is increasing like the square root of time. But if you are on the localized side, okay, then you see that the wave packet does not change. This is the localization. So you have, the experiment is exactly the same, except that you have changed one parameter. So, and by changing this parameter, you are on one side of the phase diagram, metallic side, or on the other side. Okay. So there are many other experiments. Okay. So, but in fact, what the people, there is a technique that is well known with cold atoms, is the time of flight technique, and the time of flight technique allows you to measure the momentum distribution. And so now the question is, do we have any kind of signature of localization in momentum space? And that was a lot of debate among, specialists in conferences and so on, and the people say, no, we cannot see, okay? So we analyze this more carefully, I would say. Of course, it was just conversation. The people didn't try really to do numerical simulation and so on. So this is what we did in a way. So you start with a conventional Hamiltonian for scalar particle, no spin, whatever. So you have the kinetic energy and a random potential. Essentially, you generate, a speckle pattern or whatever. Whatever you please, you do as a random potential. So numerically, what we do, we start with a plane wave, okay? And we let this plane wave at time t equals 0 evolve for a certain time into the speckle pattern of the random potential. We filter the energy. This is important not to blur, because you remember the phase diagram, there is a mobility edge. So if you have particles with energy higher than the mobility edge, they are not localized. If they are particles with energy lower than the mobility edge, they will be localized. So there is a mix of the two behavior, and so it's not good in order to really see what is happening. So numerically, we can do that. You filter the energy, okay? You choose a particular energy, and then when you do that, you compute the momentum distribution at this particular energy. And you repeat this process for many different disorder configurations, you average, and you get the momentum distribution at a given energy. Okay. So this is a time of flight technique. Okay. This I skip. Don't need to. So what do you observe? So this is a numerical, 2D numerical experiment done by Sanjeev. So you start with a plane wave. So in momentum space, kx, ky, you see this is a delta peak, ideally, okay? And now you let time flow. And so this is a regime of few scatterings, okay? And what you immediately see, you see that the initial mode is depleted, okay? And you start to build up a ring, okay? Maybe you start something happening here. So time evolves. You see the time scale is not, whatever unit, it's not a large one, okay? Now you see that there is still, a ring. The ring is not isotropic yet. The initial mode continues to be depleted. And now you see this peak happening at minus K0, okay? This is a coherent backscattering effect, okay? Let evolve again. And now you see that you have fully reached isotropization. That is to say the background is uniform. And this is the time where you reach diffusion, in fact, diffusion motion. And you have this remnant of interference effect immune to disorder average, the CBS. And this peak can be explained exactly in the same way as in optics. Okay, it's an interference between paths that are traveled in opposite direction. It's a loop interference effect. So this is the numerics, and in fact, it has been observed in experiments. Okay, this is the experiment done in Alain Aspé's group. So you start with a wave packet here, and you can see the ring developing. You can see an intensity growing here. Okay. Now the initial mode is completely disappears, and you are left with a perfectly uniform ring and a small peak CBS. So why is it so small and not as well contrasted as we have here in the numerics? It's because in this experiment, they didn't filter out the energy, and you can show that you will have a different CBS peak, and there is, a convolution happening, okay? So this is well understood. But what happens if I go at much longer time? So you see here, you see the time scales, 20 here, everything is over. There is no longer dynamics. The background is no longer moving. It's uniform. The CBS peak has developed, no dynamics at all. But now you go at longer times, and now you see the emergence of another peak exactly at K0. And this is what we call the CFS, coherent forward scattering peak. And in fact, that was not known to our knowledge, okay? And in fact, this is a genuine signature of Anderson localization in the bulk, because a relevant time scale that you get for the peak to appear is related to the Heisenberg time in the localization volume, okay? And what you can show also is that in the long time limit for time reversal invariant system, in fact, the two peaks, they become mirror images one of each other. So this is why we call them twin peaks, if you know the TV series of the 90s, Twin Peaks, okay? So this is the image that you should see for proving Anderson localization in the bulk, okay? Is that you should observe this diffusive background, and if your system is time reversal symmetric, you see a CBS peak, and you see a CFS peak. Let me say that if your system is not time reversal invariant, CBS is no longer present, but CFS will be present. So CFS is really a marker of Anderson localization. Okay, so maybe I will skip these details. Okay, let me see if, okay, or maybe not, okay. So let me just present one tool, which is two tools which are important. Okay, the spectral function. The spectral function is just, you take the retarded Green's function, and you take, in fact, the imaginary part of the Green's function and project onto K, the momentum K, and this is called AK of E at energy E. There is an expression for that, okay? And what is important with the spectral function here is that it satisfies two conservation law, okay? The first one is that if you integrate the spectral function over all energies, you get 1. And this allows you to interpret the spectral function as a probability density to have energy E at momentum K. it satisfies another law, is that if you integrate the spectral function over all k's, you get 2 pi times the average density of states. So you immediately see by dividing by 2 pi rho that a k of E divided by 2 pi rho of E is in fact an average momentum distribution at energy E. And now you are well equipped to find, I mean, an exact formula for the diffusive background. The diffusive background is I started with K0. So what is the probability that starting at K0 I have energy E? But this is a K0 of E. Now that I have energy E, what is the average momentum distribution that I have? This is this guy. And of course, here I should not integrate over K. This is a mistake. It's over E, over energy here. Okay, I need to correct that, over energy. And this is a momentum distribution. And that you get the uniform, I mean, isotropized. So now, how can I understand, try to understand the CFS peak and what is the relation to the so-called form factor? To do that, you take the wave function and you expand the Hamiltonian in terms of its eigen energies and eigen functions. Okay, then you compute the momentum distribution. Okay, so there is, I mean, algebra to be done. This momentum distribution you decompose over all energies, and in fact, this guy here is given by this long, very long formula. Okay, and you see that there is an average covering both wave functions and energies. And this is where you coin, I mean, an approximation which is inspired from random matrix theory. You say that the fluctuation in the wave functions are independent from the fluctuations from energy configuration to energy configuration of the energies. So in short, the wave functions and the energy are independent random variables. Okay. I don't have time to explain why this is true only at K0, but once you do that, you can see that you can decouple, and in fact, you can factorize this part compared to the wave functions. And when you do so, what you get is that the CFS contrasts in the optical sense. The height of the peak minus the height of the background divided by the background. Okay. And you can show that it is related to the so-called form factor. And the form factor is simply the Fourier transform of the density of states correlation. So you can plot, so this you can compute, okay? And this is, for example, in the diffusive regime, this is a comparison of a numerical computation with the exact formula obtained for random matrix. It works beautifully well. Of course, we don't have the same type of formulas in the localized regime, but you can compute numerically the form factor, and you can compute numerically the CFS contrast, and you see here, black and red points, that they match perfectly well. Okay, okay, so now that I have just mentioned about that, let me come to the critical properties, okay, which is a central part of my talk here. As I said, the CBS and the CFS peaks, they arise because of interference mechanism. And this mechanism, in fact, ultimately, they lead to localization. So if I am working in 3D, I should expect that there is something hidden in the CFS or the CBS peak that encapsulate this transition, and so encapsulate, I mean, the critical exponent and so on. So for the CBS peak, it's rather easy to understand what is going on because, as I said, the height is immediately at its maximum very early in the dynamics. So the only thing that can change for the CBS peak is the width itself, which I showed here. So what we have to do is to do a finite size scaling analysis of the width of the CBS. For the CFS, we have two variables, okay? We can have the width of the CFS peak and its height also. So what we did the height, okay? So finite size analysis of the height of the CFS peak. Okay. Of course, at this point, as I said, I mean, all the results by the gang of 4, okay, with a transition point, and is based on the one parameter scaling hypothesis. And I insist, it is an hypothesis. So we are kind of circling in a way. We have to check this one parameter scaling hypothesis by constructing the scaling function and see that it works, okay, that there is only one parameter that I need to construct this curve. And once I get that, I need to extract the parameters of the transition. So if I do the analysis with the CBS peak and the width, what I get, so when I am in the localized regime, you see that the width of the peak is not changing much as time is evolving. Okay, so you see 2000, 4000, 8000. If I am in the extended regime, yes, I see that it decreases in time, okay, here. And this is normal. And critical, there is a dynamics, a slow dynamics. So essentially, when you do the analysis, you can see that the width itself, when I am in the extended case, decrease as t to the power almost minus 0.5. So this is 0.5 is reminiscent of the square root of time, okay? One of the square root of time. We have in the localized regime, we have t to the power minus almost 1/3, minus 1/3, and almost constant when I am in the localized side. So why should I expect 1 over square root of time? It's simple, because here I come back to this image as a Young slit experiment. We know that the interfringe is going like 1 over the spatial separation between the widths. And the spatial separation between the widths here increase like the square root of time. So the inverse is 1 over square root of time, okay? So the fact that there is an exponent 1/3, this is also well known and well understood. Okay, this is called the subdiffusion. I won't enter the details. You just can read the paper that we wrote. Okay, and of course on the localized side, nothing is moving, so we expect the width to be equal to the inverse of the localization length, because the distance between the two endpoints should be the localization length. So. So what is the scaling quantity that we define? The scaling quantity is in fact the width of the CBS peak. So let me skip the details here because they are quite technical. You do the finite size scaling analysis, and if you want, I can give the details during the discussion. Okay, and you reconstruct the scaling function. And once you have the reconstruction of the scaling function, you see that you can put all these curves into a single scaling function. The tip of the curve gives you the transition point, and the behavior near the tip gives you the critical exponent, in fact. And when you do that, what you get is that the critical point is this number, okay? And the exponent is 1.61, which is compatible with what you find with other methods, okay? And which is the known exponent for the Anderson transition is 1.57, okay? Something, okay? So CFS, we do exactly the same, except for the width. So here we studied, I mean, the Anderson model on a lattice. So if we are on the metallic side, we see that we have a CBS peak and no CFS. No, this is, I mean, obvious. No localization, so no CFS. If you are on the insulating side, you have both of them, okay? And on the critical point, at the critical point, we see that we have a CFS, but it's less contrasted, and that also we understand, okay? So we do exactly the same. We do a finite size analysis. So the first thing that I would like to show, though, is the contrast as a function of the disorder strength. And you see that when you plot all the curves as a function of time, you see all these curves are plotted for different times. And you see that they all, when time increases, you see that all these curves tend to 1. Okay, I don't know if you see the tendency. And here, they tend to 0. And you see that all the curves are crossing here. So this point marks the mobility edge, in fact, in the system. Okay? And this curve shows you that, in fact, the CFS is indeed a smoking gun of the transition. It should be equal to 1 in the insulating side in the long time limit, of course. It should be 0 on the metallic side. And it should take an intermediate value at the transition. So it is a critical quantity. So you have a step-like heaviside behavior with an intermediate point exactly at the transition, discontinuous function. So again, we do the scaling analysis of the height of the CFS peak. We construct the scaling function, and here we extract again with the precision that we have, okay, the critical exponent and the mobility age for the Anderson model, and you see that the best result that are obtained in the literature are these two numbers, and you see that we are not far, at least within the numerical errors. Okay, okay. So yes, so the conclusion is that yes, the CBS and the CFS can be used to determine the critical exponent of the Anderson transition, and yes, CFS is a smoking gun, a critical quantity of the Anderson transition. So, David, do I have some time, or I should stop here?
Christian, you have another 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so then let me briefly touch at exactly what happens at the mobility edge, because I said that the peak is less contrasted, and that we understand why. Okay, so when you are exactly at the mobility edge, in fact, when you look at the wave function at this energy, it has a multifractal structure. Okay. So what does it mean? It means that if you look at this wave function, okay, when you are, in principle, when you're on the metallic side, the wave function behaves like the size of the system to the power minus the dimension, the size square. If you're on the insulating side, you have an exponential. It decays with size. So this is what you have. Okay. And exactly at the mobility edge, you have fractal type of eigenfunctions. How do you encapsulate this behavior? Well, you compute what a participation ratio. So you integrate psi square to the power q over the size of the volume of consideration that you consider, okay? And this behavior and this participation ratio scales like the size of the system minus dq times q minus 1, and dq is called the multifractal dimension, and it's 0 when you are on the localized side, and it's d, the dimension of space, if you are diffusive, and intermediate value otherwise. You see that if I take q is equal to 1, here there is, this integral is always 1, okay? So you cannot immediately define, a dq. In fact, you can, using q minus 1 as a small variable, and you look at what happens when q minus 1 goes to 0. And if you do the analysis, you will see that you can define what is known as the information dimension, which is the limit as q goes to 1 of the dq. Through this formula, you compute the entropy, if you wish, psi square log of psi square. You integrate over r over the volume. And it scales like the logarithm with a prefactor, which is the dimension. Okay? And in fact, there has been a conjecture, Bogomolny-Giraud conjecture in 2010, saying that the spectral compressibility is equal to 1 minus this information dimension divided by the dimension of space. And when you look at the formula for the spectral compressibility that you have here, complicated one, in fact, it is exactly the same as the CFS contrast. So we can combine the two. We have the Bogomolny-Giraud conjecture, and we have our result. In fact, the CFS contrast is exactly equal to the spectral compressibility. So we expect K is equal to 1 in the localized regime, K equal to 0 in the extended one, and an universal number at the critical point, D1, 1 minus D1 divided by D, and this is exactly what we see. Okay, this universal number that you get. And you see that the CFS contract exactly at the critical point does not depend on time. once you have reached, I mean, it has grown, reached its maximum value, then it stays constant, okay? So we have checked different disorders. They give all the same results, okay, typically, okay? So yes, we can use the CFS contrast exactly at the mobility edge to predict and to give the multifractal dimension D1. So of course now, and you can compare, I mean, this is a value that we have extracted from our numerics, okay, from the CFS, and you see the best computed value so far, okay, in this paper, which is consistent, okay, two numbers consistent. So of course, the next question is, can we track other multifractal dimension in momentum space? And this is a topic we are currently exploring. We know how to extract D2 now, and we are looking for the other ones, okay? Okay, so let me close here. So as a message, we have a lot to explore in the momentum distribution, okay? And we have now what we are looking at are, in fact, I mean, kicked system, the kicked rotator, for example, because this and what we are looking also at are the role of interactions on the CBS and the CFS, which is largely unexplored, okay? So with this, I have some relevant publications here, and I just would like to thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian, for these nice talks. So now session is open for questions.
I have one question actually. So you are saying this CFS peak or like that in a sense is like the order parameter to, you know.
No, I'm not saying an order parameter.
Okay, but at least, you know, that gives some signature of like, you know, whether you have this insulating state or your diffusive state. Is that correct?
Sorry, repeat.
The CFS peak, the
yes.
forward scattering peak, that is like, you know, is a signature of your like, you know, insulating the Anderson insulator or
yes.
Right?
Yes, but not an order parameter, because I mean, the Anderson transition is a second order transition. So if you have an order parameter, it should be continuous at the transition.
Okay. So
it's a critical quantity. It's a bit different. Huh?
Okay, I see. Now there are two questions related to this. So if I just go to 2D, then actually what kind of, you know, this, you know, with your disorder, what kind of feature will I see? Like this so-called CFS contrast that you plotted actually.
Okay, you can see the CFS, okay? Because okay. I mean, in 2D, it's always localized.
I see.
Okay?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
But you don't have a transition.
Yeah, because, okay, for any kind of disorder, you always have that peak.
Yeah, okay. Yes, exactly. So 1D, 2D is always localized, so you will always see, I mean, a peak. I have to say something, okay? In fact, CFS is the signature of a bounded motion. That is to say, if you consider a system which is in a box, okay, with hard walls, okay, and diffusive behavior, you will see a CFS peak growing because the boundary of the box prevents the particle from going elsewhere, okay? So you will see a peak growing in a long time limit. As soon as you start to reach the boundary of the box, you fold the scattering trajectories and you build up this interference effect, giving rise to the CFS peak. So this is obviously not localization in the Anderson sense, okay? But there is a way of checking that, is that the width, as I said, of the CFS peak that you observe is related to the size of the confining region. So if you have a wall, a box of size capital L, the width should be 1/L of the CFS peak, okay? So if you increase the size of the box, the size of the peak is decreasing, okay? if you have a box, because in numerics you always have a numerical box, okay, somewhere. What is important is that if the box is larger than the localization length, increasing the size of the box will not change the width of the peak.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So just quickly to add to that. So let's say what happens actually when, let's say in 3D, but actually when you have, let's say, this interaction, do you still have, let's say you are in 3D, but I mean, what happens when you have the interaction? Do you still kind of expect your CFS peak to show up? Something very dramatic to happen, or like?
You know, okay. In fact, I don't know. I can tell you this, okay? We have studied what is happening in a mean field description. Okay, for example, you replace the Schrödinger equation by the Gross-Pitayevsky equation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then what you will see that the CFS and the CBS peak are disappearing. Okay, in a certain regime of parameter, of course, always. Okay, disappearing, and you have a thermalization taking place. So you get Rayleigh-Jeans distribution for the energy.
Okay.
So thermalization. If the conditions are right, you can even see from this thermalization, you can see a further condensation. Okay, so you have a bimodal distribution, and this has been published already and so on. Okay, but this is a mean field description. What I don't know, and I don't think the people have studied that, is what is happening when you are in a many-body localized regime.
Yes. Because
there is this localization taking place, and so I don't know what is really happening there. I have not studied, I don't know. That would be interesting.
Christian, I have a question related to the first question of before. I mean, so now imagine that you are in a localized system, 3D, and then you have an open system now, but it's localized. So you will have a CFS, which is scaled by the localization length. Yeah. But somehow, if you go back now to the real space, you say, okay, I have energy flowing along the initial momentum. So it means that I will have somehow some kind of conductivity, right? Is it this picture? Is it correct? Because if I have K0, then somehow some particles should go across.
That's a good question. How should I answer that? Listen, I mean, I don't have a clear picture, physical picture of that, but what I know, okay, because the people have studied that, is what is happening, this enhanced return to the origin, okay? So if you start the wave packet with a certain initial velocity, you look at the wave packet, it goes and comes back and stays at the origin. So it's not that the particles are continuously flowing. That would contradict, localization.
That's right. Yes.
Okay, that would contradict localization. So if you go to the real space and you look at the motion of the wave packet, so you see that of course the particles are going in, say, in K0 in one direction, and then you see that it slows down, and then it comes back to there is this K0 minus K0, and you come back. Okay.
I see. So somehow the wave packet is probably separated between, the CFS and the CBS. So then in average.
The point, okay, I don't have the answer right now. The point is that you see that there is not a simple relation between psi square in momentum space and psi square in real space. The psi square in momentum space is the Fourier transform of the correlation in real space. So so there are correlations in the two. So the correlation are conspiring in such a way that yes, the particle is trapped; it's no longer moving. Even if you see these two peaks, okay. And I understand you could say K0 minus K0, what is happening? But no, in real space, when you look at what is happening in real space, it goes back to and stays where it was, where it started.
I have other question, but maybe somebody has also questions.
Maybe Sanjeev wants to comment. After all, he did all the beautiful numerics.
Oh, no, thank you. It was your idea. I was just the hand, right?
Come on. You had a lot of ideas.
So I have another idea. I mean, I have another question. So here you give all the theory for scalar wave.
Yeah.
What will happen if you are now in, I don't know, for example, for electromagnetism, where you have a vectorial wave? I mean, do you expect the same picture? Or?
Okay. Yes, but with some surprises. Okay, and we are still investigating that. If you take, for example, we have studied the so-called symplectic class for the so essentially a spin 1/2. So time reversal symmetry is respected, but you have a spin 1/2 system. Okay. So of course now you have, as you know, in optics, and you're an expert on that, you have channels. So for example, when you start with a plane wave, say, you can say, okay, I start with a given spin state. Okay, and of course you can look at the momentum distribution for the same channel, starting, say, in plus state. I look at the particles in plus state, or I start in plus state and I look at minus state, the transitions, okay? And surprisingly enough, okay, what you see is that there is a CBS quotation mark, and I will explain why the quotation mark, CBS dip, okay, when you change the channel, and you see the CFS peak developing in the same channel. Okay. Okay. And so this is okay. There are things that we understand, we know how to explain, but the full vision is not fully understood. Okay. Essentially, I can say a word. Okay, is because we wanted to study the transition point, and in 2D you don't have transition point except if you induce, I mean, spin orbit. Okay. So this is what we did. Then you have a transition point. But this is tricky, in fact, because, in fact, the diffusion constant does not vanish at the transition point. Okay, so what we understand clearly what is going on the metallics on the localized side. Okay, we don't understand really what is going on at the transition point because the diffusion constant never vanishes. So there is something a bit different at play. Okay. But as I said, the same channel, you start plus, you look at the momentum distribution in plus, you have the CFS peak developing, showing that there is a localization effect, and no CBS. But when you start with plus and you look in a minus channel, then you see a CBS dip, not a peak, a dip. And this is due to time reversal symmetry, in fact. You can understand that.
I have a very last question. I mean, regarding the last part of your talk about multifractionality. I mean, for me, I mean, how I understand fractal system is that when the dimension is not an integer, and in your case, somehow you were a bit fast, but you give the value of d, which was very close to 2. I mean, is it
where?
In one of your last slides when you try to derive the what I understood as the effective dimensionality of your system, but maybe I didn't understand clearly what was the.
Okay, where? Which one?
Here, D1, for example.
But yeah. D1, it turns out that it's close to 2, but it is not 2.
Okay, so that's why you call it fractal, because it's not 2. I mean, for me, fractality is the dimension is not an integer. Is it?
It can be. It can be.
Okay. Okay.
Can be. You define the dimension in some way. Okay. Look at the diffusion motion. Diffusion motion. The dimension, the fractal dimension that you can define is 2. It covers the plane.
Okay.
Okay. So So no, you can define, I mean, a dimension, and the fractal set can have, I mean, a dimension which is an integer. Okay, this is not, but here it's true that it is close to 2 in a way. Okay, but don't forget that here we are in dimension 3 anyway. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so okay, but for example, this one, the 1.958, the uncertainty in the numbers are coming after. So it's definitely not 2.
Mm-hmm. I see.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, do we have other questions? Okay, so if not, thank you very much, Christian, for the talks, and for everybody, have a nice weekend. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.